All right, everyone, if you would return to your seats, we'll get our last panel before lunch underway. Again, it seems like the texting's going well, but 22333 and then GNDC in your message line. Our next panel has to do with business incentives, and our moderator is Mr. Scott Hennen. We'll welcome him to the stage and get things underway.
Hello, everybody. Come on.
There's nobody here. We're done.
That's it. This one always gets me going. How many UND fans are in this room? How many NDSU fans are in the room? How many none of the above are in the room? All right. One Cobber, a couple of you Mary folks, Jamestown College, way to go, nice to have you here. All right, we're gonna crank with the next panel, and I know we're doing this rapid fire, so I encourage everybody to come on in and join the conversation on incentives. Thank you, Tom, for the introduction that I didn't hear because I was on the radio, but I am now ready to roll on this particular topic and looking forward to it. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about everybody that is up here quickly, and what I'm hoping to do is give these folks as much time as possible on the different issues, and also obviously get to your texts and your comments as well. We're talking incentives today, and there's a million different incentives. This specifically would be a business incentive. I've asked each of the panelists to give me an example of an incentive they do or don't like, right? And so you have an idea of kind of what we're talking about and where we'll go today with this, because we obviously could go a million different directions. When I talk about you, just give a wave so they know who we're talking about here. Dale Zimmerman is a businessman, property developer, but I think probably most known for that cowboy ribeye at the Peacock. So give him a wave there, Dale. Runs a great restaurant, the Peacock Alley. Tony Gehrig is a member of our Good Armed Services and doing wonderful work with the North Dakota National Guard. Yes, indeed. He is also a commissioner now, the Fargo City Commission. I kind of call him the Abe Lincoln of Fargo because, it took Abe a while to get in office, if you research Abe. And Tony tried a few times, but he's there now. So Tony Gehrig is on the panel today. Downtown Dave, I used to call this guy, but he now is Director of Public Affairs for Sanford Health, Dave Anderson, right there. We have a almost City Commission candidate. Nolan Canright is here. Nolan ran a great race for Bismarck City Commission 2016 candidate and lost by like 6 votes or 8 votes or 68 or something like that. It couldn't have been any closer, So we appreciate him as well. And lastly, the Marketing and Assistant Director for the Downtown Business Association of Bismarck, President of their Community Foundation, Kate Herzog. Kate, give a wave. Okay, how about a big hand for our panel? So let's start with the best or the worst, depending on your perspective, okay? Nolan, give me an example of a business incentive you'd like to see go away.
Well, when I ran, I talked a lot about TIF districts and Renaissance zones. And in here, and I think it's very important that we look at this from an open point of view in here, as a former law enforcement officer, when you go to a call, you have to take both sides of the story. This is great that everybody's up here. And a lot of people say these incentives are great. They're growing Bismarck, Fargo, or any town in North Dakota, or the country for that matter. But we have to look at the other side of the picture. So a quick example of why I'm against this, why I'm against what I would call our TIF districts, if we're narrowing it down, is a TIF district is created. We're having a new one right now in downtown Bismarck, where, yes, they're still paying taxes, but their taxes are essentially going down to pay down specials on their infrastructure. Let's just call it a parking ramp, or your water, your sewer, or whatnot, that we all pay our specials everywhere else. So recently in Bismarck, and I'm going to relate it all my information to Bismarck, There's talk about increasing a sales tax, and during some of the forums that were held by the city, it showed that our sales tax in Bismarck is stagnant. We've kind of tapered off in Bismarck. So we're not bringing in a lot of new sales tax. However, we're still giving an incentive to certain areas of town. And what this does, imagine you're an owner of a business. Let's use the hotel example. You're a hotel owner somewhere else in Bismarck that's outside this other small district of growth that's receiving incentives. You paid your own way, your own taxes, your own specials, your road, your sewer, your parking lot, okay? In order to make a profit on that business, you have to at least charge a certain amount. So with a new hotel coming into Bismarck, a 4-star hotel that is not paying all the same specials as elsewhere in town could essentially charge a 3-star rate. Now again, I brought up that the sales tax is stagnant because if we're not bringing more people into Bismarck, we're basically moving money around. We're taking from one area of town and moving it to another area of town. Is that fair? I don't believe it's right.
All right. Dale Zimmerman, good or bad example of an incentive, a business incentive?
Well, I would have to say that a good example is you can look around the country, all across the country, and find good examples of enterprise zones, which were, Ronald Reagan, father of conservatism, and Jack Kemp are the ones that actually came up with this idea. And if you go back just a few decades ago, downtown Bismarck was a completely different picture than what you see in the last couple years. For those of you that remember, Fargo, same thing, NP Avenue. When I went to college in Fargo in the 80s, my dad gave me two words of advice. One is, stay away from NP Avenue, you probably get killed. And the second thing is always have your ID. So downtown Fargo has changed dramatically as well. When I got to Fargo, Hennen Avenue in downtown Minneapolis was even worse than NP Avenue. Today, Hennepin Avenue in downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, worlds apart as far as what it used to be. Downtown Bismarck, I remember as a kid growing up in a small rural town, and we'd go to the big city of Bismarck, and we would drive from Memorial Bridge. Back in those days, it would sing to you as you drove across the river, and the Patterson Hotel was pink and empty, abandoned, pigeons living in it. The building was condemned to be torn down. Across the street was the Amtrak depot, which I owned. For sale for $10,000, nobody wanted to buy it. Kitty Corner was a Civic Square building, for sale for $1. $1. For 10 years, nobody wanted to buy it. Along came these enterprise zones. There were the Renaissance Zone, which was originated by a Republican legislature and signed by a Republican governor, and investments started to happen in downtown Bismarck. As a result of that, if you take those 3 properties that I just mentioned, the Patterson Hotel, which was condemned to be torn down, the depot, which was abandoned by Amtrak and the railroad, which most likely would have been torn down, and the Civic Square building, the only reason that was not torn down is because it would have cost the city $200,000 and they didn't have the budget to tear it down. $500 per property was generated in property tax. 0 sales tax because they were all abandoned buildings. Today, those property values on those 3 properties alone are about $10 million, generating about $80,000 in property tax revenue alone every single year. $500,000 in sales tax revenue out of the Peacock Alley alone every single year. That would have not happened if these business incentives would not have happened. Are some of those local incentives? Yes. However, the Patterson was saved by a federal incentive, Section 8 housing. The Renaissance program is a state program administered by the local governments. 54 different city governments across the state participate in the Renaissance Zone. So without Renaissance, I'm telling you what, Bismarck would be a ghost town downtown. There would be, do you guys remember the Radisson Hotel? That wasn't even a parking lot. The city didn't even have money to make it a parking lot. It was a hole in the ground, 10 feet deep. All it did was collect water. Business incentives brought in the Sheraton Hotel, and it prospered. That was an anchor. The Peacock is an anchor. So I believe without a doubt, business incentives are crucial to us going forward.
All right, and by the way, any questions, as I think you know, you text GNDC and your message to 22333. We'll take some questions in a bit after we get through everybody's kind of opening comments here related to particular incentives that they're fond or not so fond of. Dave Anderson, you have been around that game for a lot of years. Saw those when they came into place. Talk a little bit about one that you think is a shining example. And you and I were talking earlier, it's not just downtowns and Renaissance zones been used. That's up to communities, right? They can put it to any particular area that's blighted.
Absolutely. Across the state, I understand there's something like 58 or so Renaissance zones in 58 communities. I'm the old shoe up here. I was involved in this starting with the very first year of the Renaissance zone following the passage of the legislation. And so I have to, I have to go to the Renaissance zone as the biggest, mightiest tool in the toolbox for us as we went through the 10 years that I was involved with downtown Fargo. It was the ghost town that Dale mentions. If you think back to 1999, 2000, downtown didn't have much to offer. Its valuation, total valuation was less than $200 million. Now I believe it's about triple that. A couple of hundred projects, 250 projects, counting the leases, counting the businesses that benefited from the redevelopment of properties downtown. A phenomenal turnaround for our community. And it's more than valuation. It's more than the taxes. It's what we've created for the community. It's a living room. It's a venue. It's a gathering place. It's a neighborhood. We have so many more people living downtown than we ever had. It's just a lot of things for a lot of different people. And so to measure it just in valuation or just in the taxes that are generated, I think is really selling the whole effort very short.
Tony Gehrig.
Downtown Fargo is the most valuable land in North Dakota without oil underneath it, and we're still subsidizing it. It's been 17 plus years now, and we're not starting to pull off the accelerator. We are jamming the accelerator forward. We're stacking incentives upon incentives upon incentives, TIFs on top of Renaissance zones, on top of pilots. Sometimes it'll take 45 plus years in some cases to get a break-even point for the residents of Fargo. So incentives can work. Incentives can work if they're limited. But right now we have such a broad brush and we have an indefinite incentives that we're carrying forward now. The reason that's a bad thing is because these have consequences. When we meddle in the free market, there are consequences. And just to name the top 5 of those, my tax bill in the city of Fargo is 7% higher. Not just the city share. My total tax bill, when I look at my property taxes, is 7% higher than it would be. That's $500.
Help us with that math, Tony. How do you do that?
That's $500. So when someone doesn't pay their taxes, we pay it for them. If you have a 10-year pilot, for example, with 100% exemption, that tax money doesn't get taken away from the city of Fargo or from the schools. People pay that money for them. So that's how you get a direct correlation between me putting money in your pocket when you don't pay your property tax.
So what you're doing there is you're totaling all the incentives, the actual cost of the incentives, and then you're pulling that number off of, you're dividing it, I guess, by the tax tab that goes to the
I didn't do a lot of math. I asked my assessor to do it for me. So he did that math for me, and that's what it broke down to, is 7%. That was as reported in the Fargo Forum as well. So we have young families who are looking to buy homes in Fargo. We have a crisis in Fargo. 60% of our residents live in apartments. But if you go talk to one of them right now, they'll say, there's no affordable housing in Fargo. I can't buy a house. And by adding to their property tax bill every year, you're not helping the situation. You're hurting the situation in the long run. We're cannibalizing growth. We talk about how fantastic downtown is growing right now. There are examples where businesses, big businesses, came to the Fargo City Commission and said, we were going to grow in South Fargo, where there's infrastructure, by the way, but we decided to move downtown because he gave us $15 million. Well, that's not a value added. That's simply cannibalizing growth from one area of Fargo, picking winners and losers by the government, saying this area is more valuable than that area, so therefore we're going to pay for that. So there's no value added there. It simply moves the buck from one place to another. We're redistributing wealth. We're taking money from the working class and from young families and passing it up to people who don't, in many cases, need it. I've asked 3 different companies during city commission meetings, do you need this incentive? They answered no, and they still got the incentive, in some cases in a 4-to-1 vote, me being the only no vote. In another case, Tony Grimberg came along with me because FedEx, which you've all heard of by now, I'm sure, using a state incentive to move from Grand Forks to Fargo. They said they didn't need the incentive. We still gave it to them. The objection there is we're using state incentives to move from one city to another. We're not adding any value if we steal from each other. It doesn't make any sense. It's an unfair and unsustainable tax system, which we already talked about. The government doesn't even know in most cases how this affects people. I asked the question when I became commissioner last year, how much does this cost the average taxpayer? They shrugged their shoulders. They didn't even know the question was out there. They didn't know what that meant. So we did some digging, we did some math, and we figured it out. But the sad thing is the people on those committees are approving these, having no idea what the impact is to the average taxpayer, young families, for example, or the elderly who are on fixed incomes. Incentives take away local control. I, as a city commissioner, control the school board's mills. And by the way, they have 3 times the mills that I have as a city commissioner. I control the counties, I control the airports, vector control, and the parks. I can take their mills away from them and exempt a business for 30 years if I want. And there's nothing they can do to stop me. I'm not asking to end incentives, all right? I'm not asking for any of that, statewide or otherwise. All I'm asking for is that these entities that have their mills, that you put in place to protect those mills, they have an up or down vote on every single incentive going forward, because currently they don't. I can take their mills and do what I want with them, and they have no say whatsoever.
How does it work? So if FedEx walk in, they talk to somebody in the city planning office in Fargo and say, hey, how many programs you got? Want to see what fits for us, and okay, we'll take that one and that one?
If they apply for it just like any smart business would. And I want to point out real quick, I don't blame businesses for applying for this. I blame the government for offering it for so long. So yes, a smart businessman will come up to the city offices. They'll ask, are there incentives available for what I'm doing? We will help them fill out the paperwork. They'll submit the paperwork. We'll see if it meets our criteria. And some commissioners will just vote yes if it meets our criteria.
All right, I'm gonna go next to Kate, and then we'll kind of throw this around with some questions that are starting to come in as well. Kate, give me an example of a but-for project, meaning this doesn't happen but for the incentive. That's not on the tax rolls. It does not happen. No way. An example where this really works well.
The city of Bismarck has essentially reached out to the people who have used the incentives and people who could potentially use the incentives. And there are a lot of people who did use, for instance, Renaissance Zone, who got back to the city of Bismarck, anonymously, essentially. They weren't going to use their names, but said, but for this, we wouldn't have done it. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. One is in downtowns we have, at least in downtown Bismarck, we have design restrictions downtown. You can't put up a steel-sided building or something like that. We ask that you build in a manner that really represents the history and the mixed-use urban density in downtown Bismarck. And so we really hold developers to a higher standard, and that's part of the reason the incentives have come into place in downtown Bismarck. I just want to go back a little bit and talk about, it really is kind of a history lesson, I think, why some of these incentives exist. Urban renewal, in the 60s and 70s, I think you could say was not a great experiment. And I think a lot of the incentives that you see now have come out of the bad things that happen with urban renewal, tearing down historic buildings, emptying out the core. We spend a lot of time incentivizing people to destroy downtowns. In hindsight, not great. And so that's why, again, a lot of these incentives exist. I think to Tony's point a little bit, to talk about the rest of the community and how the downtown, if we want to focus on downtowns, affects the rest of the community. You could probably say with a lot of certainty that downtown subsidizes the rest of the community, and it's because you have to look at how much infrastructure and long-term debt is incurred when you build in a greenfield site. Downtowns are the most tax-efficient areas in your community. You reuse the streets, you have a lot of density. Downtowns really are kind of the Swiss Army knife of the community. It's going to give you more money than it's going to use generally. But I will agree, there was a blogger in Bismarck starting to ask some of the really good questions we need to ask. Does all growth pay for itself? Absolutely not. Does a lot of growth in downtown pay for itself and contribute more out to the community? Absolutely.
One of the themes from the questions we're getting a lot of is, okay, you sold me, these work, they did a good job, but they've done their job. Dave, what about that? I mean, you've been at this a long time, and you look pre-Renaissance Zone where Fargo was to where they are now, world of difference. Do you say mission accomplished, and now obviously we've built enough of a deal to be a draw and we don't need it anymore?
When I was doing this work, I would be asked that question a lot, when is it going to be finished? And I didn't dare ever say that it was ever finished, because it's like any organic thing. If you say it's done, then it's done and it starts to decline.
Well, you wouldn't have to say it's done. You just say, look, we don't need to incentivize it to the degree we were anymore, right?
Well, but I think if we remove the incentives, downtown Fargo, for example, is about half parking lot right now. There is so much asphalt in our downtown that we have lots of ground, about half of the acreage, that is available to do other things. I think of the Robert Street project that is just now underway. New tower crane up over downtown. We like tower cranes. That property is probably generating $6,000 or $7,000 worth of property taxes right now. The project that is underway there is going to probably generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 in taxes. But it's also going to park a lot more cars. It's going to house a lot more businesses. It's going to house a lot more families and households. And it's going to contribute a great deal more to the life of the downtown center. Without the Renaissance Zone incentive, I don't believe that project is possible.
Quickly, Nolan and then Tony, is that what you guys are advocating? Is it time to sunset these? Or Tony, I think you said up or down vote. Nolan, what's your thought?
Well, the TIF district, the original TIF in Bismarck, is older than I am. And I won't say my age here, but it's been around a long time. And we start getting into some of the questions, we start getting into some problems there. If we use a core grant from TIF to make some improvements on your building, which recently happened into a building in a downtown area that was sold for a huge profit. That money was never paid back. And a lot of people are these incentives great? What we need to look at, what I want to say is not only a sunset, let's look at the other side of the picture. If we didn't have these incentives, as Tony said, that the residents of Fargo are paying 7% more already, why don't we reduce property taxes? Make it fair across the board. Why is the government going to get involved and pick the location of the winner and loser? As I mentioned the hotel earlier, if our sales tax is not or our revenue is not increasing in Bismarck, if the same amount of people are continually coming over and there's data that says we're not increasing revenue, why is the government getting involved and giving an incentive essentially downtown to an area that's going to pull people away from another similar business that's paid their own way? So again, our best assets are already here. So would a 5-year is what you're saying? Should we have a sunset, or should we look at eliminating it and not piling on incentive after incentive after incentive?
I want to get Tony and Dale in here because there's a question for you on the data. What I'd love on this? I don't know about you folks. I want data, right? I want real data on this because there's a lot of emotion involved. But I mean, Tony, you brought some to the table. But Dale, somebody earlier said Dale Zimmerman nailed it. It's the sales tax revenue that we ought to be. In other words, that has to be put into the mix too. So if you could get a true, a picture of what this is, so you could make the case on how much is there that isn't there. But is it sunsetting? Is it just ending them all together? Or is it up or down votes on everyone and leave them in place?
Control. My answer for Fargo would be different than Bismarck. I'm not asking for the state legislator to come in and just demolish this whole system. I'm saying allow the people in the area to decide for themselves. Having a city commission without the consent of Burley County, for example, who voted 5-0 to end the system, and they're still doing it, by the way. God knows how that works. So they are blatantly going against what the will of people is, and they're using their mills with them anyway. I want to use a specific example in Fargo when we talk about return on investment. The Robert Street ramp is a $12 million ramp that the city gave to a company to build for us. They're going to pay back that loan through the dollars they would otherwise have paid in property taxes. They're paying about $3,000 a year now. It'll be worth $300,000. That sounds great, but do the math on that. It'll take 35 years for the people of Fargo to break even on that investment. And in the meantime, schools, parks, the airport, the county make zero, above and beyond that $3,000, make zero on that investment for 40 years. That's not a good investment. If I gave any one of you $1 million, or if you gave me $1 million, and I said, in 40 years, I'll give it back to you.
All right, help me on that one. Help me on that one, Dave, though, because while he's right, and what it's doing, it won't be there. The parking ramp serves a purpose that could otherwise be an expenditure of the city. Meanwhile, you've got condos and businesses all around it that are generating new revenue, to Dale's point, right?
Absolutely. We're creating housing, we're creating business opportunities for people, but also we're paying for that with the user revenues. It isn't as if we're paying for it across the community. We're paying for it, but with the people that are pulling their cars in, paying their rent for the spaces, either in the residential or in the businesses. It's cash flowing, it's creating opportunities for people, and it's adding a great deal of value to the community over and above taxation evaluation.
And
it's creating more energy.
And it's a city necessity that they could bond for, I guess, or they could, whatever, but they're financing it a different way. So I think you're dismissing, Tony, there, the benefit of the stuff wrapped around it is all I'm saying. Dale, you're a data guy. You're looking at spreadsheets 10 times a day on all the different things you got going on. Do we have enough data in this debate? Do we have enough data to fairly, what Nolan and Tony both raised points that I think have all of us going, really? We need to, I want to know, is it that those are the numbers? But I don't get a sense we can look, okay, what is it? And that we are informed enough in this debate with data. Agree or disagree?
I agree. I mean, there is a ton of data. And if you are a data nerd like myself, I'm a businessman, P&L statements, you got to live by them or you're going to fail. So when you look at profit and loss and what it costs to do a program, so there's so many incentive programs out there. The Renaissance Zone is the one that in Bismarck and in Fargo has been the most under the most scrutiny in the last 6 months or so. And that's because they were up for renewal. And if you look at the Renaissance Zone, just in downtown Bismarck as an example, the money that is generated because of the Renaissance Zone in the last 5 years is mind-boggling from what it would have been if the incentives wouldn't have been there. Just 6 years ago, rent in downtown Bismarck for retail on first floor, you could have a pick of 20 different places in about a 4-block square. And rent was going for $3 to $5 a square foot. And they couldn't rent it. $3 to $5 a square foot. Today, it's $17 to $22 a square foot. And we don't have the lawyers on the first floor anymore. They've moved up because those buildings are too expensive, and retail boutiques have come in. When you are dealing with commerce of retail, restaurants, alcohol, guess what? We all collect sales tax. The sales tax revenue for downtown Bismarck has absolutely skyrocketed. Restaurants like I'm in, we collect an actual extra percent than anybody else does in retail called the booze tax, right? Lodging and restaurants and alcohol. We collect more tax than anybody else. And 6 years ago, downtown Bismarck had the Peacock Alley struggling to stay open, had Fiesta Villa across the street, and Stewart at the Pirogue had just opened a couple years earlier. That's it. That's all there was, folks. There was nobody else. Anybody else could go downtown. You remember tumbleweeds going around, right? It was horrible. Economically, 6 years later, there are 14 restaurants within 2 blocks of my front door at the Peacock now open, collecting sales tax from all of you folks that are coming to support it. Customers coming to the Peacock alone 6 years ago, about 150 a week. That was it. Now it's about 5,200 a week. So the economic impact that is generated from all of you and all of your kids coming downtown, the data, Scott, you can't collect it fast enough. If Commissioner Rauschenberger's in here, maybe he could help us with the sales tax. But the sales tax he knows better than anybody that's generated from downtown, you can't deny it. So if you're looking at property tax, today this lot is generating $500 in property tax. Big deal. You go into the Renaissance, you build a project on it, you invest $2 million. The Renaissance, all it does is freeze that rate for a period of time of 7 years. At the end of 7 years, it's taxed at the new rate, which is $2 million. You know that 7 years at $500? Not a lot of money. 1 year after coming off the Renaissance Zone, that more than pays for itself, and it rejuvenates and builds all the stuff around it. It's called economic development.
All right, everybody wants in, and we'll get to a lightning round here too, so where you could just budge in whenever you need to. But Tony, go ahead quickly.
We're acting like Renaissance Zone is all we're doing. We're stacking incentives dramatically, folks. In some cases, 30, 35 years for one project. It takes decades. My son will be retired by the time we ever see that money even back. Not a profit on that return, but that money back. So Renaissance Zones are probably the best tool, that the least offensive to people like me. But a pilot for 15 years on top of a TIF where they don't pay taxes to anybody, that's a big deal. So let's not pretend that Renaissance Zone is all we're talking about.
One commentator here says if Bismarck ran its TIF the way Fargo does, half the problem would go away. You agree with that, Nolan?
Well, I think there's several ways to look at it. I think we do have some major issues in Bismarck with our TIF, which it will finally expire here soon. But as we saw with the Renaissance Zone, when does the yellow brick road end? As someone said, we just renewed it again. And that was, again, for those of you that live in Bismarck or Burley, against a 5-0 vote from our county commission that said no. And when we're giving incentives, I was former law enforcement. We are indeed not putting money into law enforcement, to our parks, to our schools. My kids came home, Bismarck Public Schools, with raffle tickets for playground equipment. So there's a correlation there. Are we not funding what taxes are supposed to go to, our infrastructure, our schools, our public safety?
But you can make that point about every expenditure of the city government, they're costing that, though, right?
I'm sorry, go ahead, say that again?
I'm saying, I get your argument. Your argument is because of incentives, it's taking money away from my kids and their equipment. I'm saying you could make that about every expenditure also. Are you spending it the right way? Are you doing it the right way?
Are we doing it the right way? So going back to Fargo's, we do have, if you look at a map of downtown Bismarck, now we have pilots we have Renaissance in our TIF here. Fargo also has their pilots. But look at a map of downtown Bismarck. When we hear that these Renaissance zones are great, as soon as their Renaissance zone exemption's up, it sits inside the TIF district. So the money's still going down to downtown core projects. And we could go back to sales tax. Well, I hope sales tax is increasing when we as citizens are helping to incentivize our downtown. But how do you explain what's going on elsewhere in the community? And as what we just saw in Bismarck when we're talking about road infrastructure, sales tax citywide, not just looking at area, has tapered off. So now if we continue to incentivize areas in Bismarck, again, the data's out there, we're not increasing, we're just moving money from one area of town to another. That's what's happening right now.
Kate, then Dave. Kate, there's an argument here that says sunset it. We've done our good, let's go a different direction. What do you say about that?
Our TIF will be sunsetted, and all the new TIFs have, a sunset. That's the legislature passed a few years ago when we were discussing TIFs. And so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing that TIFs, at least the way that Bismarck uses them, should sunset. But I think the question really is, you're sort of talking about fairness and taking from one and giving to the other. You could use the school district as an example of someone who is extremely subsidizes, the road infrastructure. You put a school out in a green field, and houses pop up around it, roads pop up around it. But that infrastructure is a huge subsidy, and it's a long-term debt obligation. And that's why downtown programs generally work, is because that long-term debt obligation isn't there anymore. Broadway's been Broadway since it's been Broadway. And so I think you really need to look at where all the city's money comes from and where all the city's money goes. Do we have that data right now? I would argue that we don't. If you do a P&L on the city of Bismarck, but you do it by neighborhood, by region, in the community, you're not going to see, unless our public works department can't really track it that way. And I think they're going to invest in some software where they can say, this is how much money we actually spent in services in this area versus this is what we got out of it. And again, I think you'll see that downtown will be by far the most tax efficient when it comes to what they use for services, as opposed to what they produce in tax. Downtown Bismarck does produce the most tax per acre in the city of Bismarck.
My favorite text so far, if the Renaissance Zone goes away tomorrow, your kids will still come home with raffle tickets for playground equipment. So, Nolan, I don't think you're going to get out of that one. Dave, you want to get in here. Go ahead.
She's absolutely right. The downtown per square foot is obviously the most valuable property in town. I think it needs to be mentioned too. Thanks to our friends in the legislature, we've realized real property tax relief because of what they've done to support the schools and so forth. And our property taxes in Fargo have actually gone down a good deal since 1999. We started the program right at the end of the legislative session in '99. And then in 2004, we started to realize the real return on those 5-year investments, those 5-year periods of time that the Renaissance Zone projects were in place. And we've seen that number grow and grow to the point where the Renaissance Zone, I believe by the numbers, is one of the contributing elements of the property tax relief that we are realizing. The recent RZ plan that was approved in Fargo includes letters of endorsement from our school district. It's not as if the school district is screaming about the Renaissance Zone and how it's robbing from their coffers, because we have a letter in the plan that says we support this. this has been good for our base, and it's good for the community.
Second favorite text, if your business can't launch without incentives, your business plan sucks and needs retooling. All right, Dale, what about that?
Yeah. I mean, Scott, you know me personally, and I'm personally against all business incentives. I would never partake in them. I've never applied for them. I just believe that if a customer wants to support me, they shouldn't support me with tax dollars. They should come in and buy a cheeseburger. I've always felt that way. I am here because I'm also a student of history. And when I look at what's happened, it's undeniable that things like the Renaissance Zone have brought economic development to our community in ways that would have never happened. The business world, for instance, nobody wants to be first, right? Who wants to build the first thing downtown? Who wants to be the first guy to be the anchor? Nobody. It's too risky. I own a business on the north side of town as well. And I'm a property owner on the north side of town with that business. And I'm telling you, it is way harder doing business in downtown Bismarck than it is on the north side of town, without a doubt. So there's a fair balance that needs to be done. Do we need a sunset on the Renaissance Zone? Yeah, I believe every tax incentive program needs a sunset because it needs to be reevaluated. When you implement a tax, whether it's a TIF or a Renaissance Zone incentive or the core program or whatever, if you don't put a sunset in there, then the legislature and the people that are working for the government, it just becomes part of our minutia. It doesn't become reevaluated to see if it's actually working. Our legislature actually is going through the work and seeing if these programs pay off. They're asking the questions. That's what they're supposed to do. And they're doing a great job by asking those questions. I think once they ask those questions, they're going to get the answers that, without a doubt, they did the right thing in writing that program and that it paid off. Whether they reinstitute it again, I don't know. That's up to them. But I'm telling you, you cannot dispute the numbers of the Renaissance Zone program in Fargo or in Bismarck. I mean, it's indisputable. It's huge success.
All right, well, we have about 15 minutes left, and we want to make sure we get all the points here. We'll go to some of the text, but if you got a point, just get in here, okay? So don't be afraid to do it. Tony, I know you went in. Go ahead.
Just really quick. One, infill does not mean downtown.
What?
Infill does not mean downtown. You can infill on 32nd Avenue South in Fargo, North Dakota. So let's be very clear when we say infill, it doesn't have to be downtown. Right. These have become entitlements. I think Dale was right there. People apply for them and get them without any thought. It's muscle memory at this point. We sign on the dotted line, whether you need it or not, and the but-for question needs to be asked. Property taxes did not go down. Fargo still levies 55 mills. It was 57 last year before I got in. The state bought down a portion of that. And will they do it again? If they don't, every resident in my city will absolutely notice their tax bill even more than they are already. And finally, what I'll say is the school districts and the counties, they don't know what's happening. I asked a school board member who's now on the city commission, John Strand, when did you vote to approve the Renaissance Zone again? He said, I didn't. I said, you did? How did it happen? Consent agenda. I asked the same thing to a 20-year county member. Same conversation. It was on the consent agenda. So they don't know how their money is being spent. They aren't coming to the meetings. They have no say. They have no vote. And then we expect a letter every 5 years.
You don't read the consent agenda
items? I always do, but some don't.
I mean, I read consent agenda items, and I would think that those elected people would read consent agenda items as well.
Through. Sometimes some things slip.
No, you can always take it off consent.
Yeah, you can.
Kate, I want to get you in here on one point with a question from the audience. Said Grand Forks has beautiful downtown, no incentives.
Grand Forks has Renaissance Zone, and it had a huge injection of federal money after the flood. So that's.
I also love Grand
right.
Forks, but I don't think it's quite yet beautiful. They're getting there. They're getting there. It's better. But
I lived above Bonzers
adopted
for a
hometown,
long
I love
time.
the place.
Whoever's out there in Grand Forks, you do have a beautiful downtown. It's more beautiful if you've been at Bonzers for like 3 hours.
Right. Yeah. The schooners tend to make the downtown really beautiful.
They do.
Yeah.
I think to Tony's point is a really good point. The incentives that are used in Fargo, I mean, there's more incentives used outside of downtown Fargo than inside of downtown Fargo. So, I mean, we don't have to talk all about downtown incentives, although that's really what's kind of come to the forefront, based on whatever agenda is out there. But, I mean, there are huge incentives, and most of which are not directed at the downtown and do have long-term infrastructure debt, obligations.
Nathan, somebody's asked, how is the TIF in Bismarck different than Fargo? Because somebody said if Bismarck just did it like Fargo, it'd be fine. How is it different?
The dollars go into a big bucket in Bismarck to fund things for downtown. For Fargo, it's project specific. So if you were to build a parking garage, you would pay your taxes like you would otherwise to pay back the loan that the city gave you. So it is quite different.
But doesn't make you love it any less, right?
I don't have to deal with Bismarck, so they can do whatever they feel.
No, I'm saying the audience is saying Fargo's got it figured out. Bismarck should do the same. You're not a big fan of the Fargo.
Ours is just more specific. You still lose revenue for schools, parks, all those things. It's still people not paying their taxes, and it still impacts others. I pay to make up what they aren't paying in my tax bill every single day, and so does everyone else. So no, it's not any better.
Another comment says, we are only talking a couple of cities. Many have not yet used these programs and will need them to revitalize their cities as well. What about that? What about, okay, if you are to agree, Fargo's, reached the pinnacle, right? Cross the finish line, don't need them anymore. Bismarck getting close, but Jamestown, still a little bit to go. I guess Nolan or Tony first, just because you guys are against them.
This is hurting other communities.
Say again?
Let's just compare Bismarck-Mandan. We're right across the river. If I'm going to start a business here and Mandan's going to give me a big incentive, but Bismarck won't, I'm going to minimize my risk and most likely put that in Mandan. So this affects everybody. It doesn't just affect Bismarck, Mandan, Fargo. Every time we give an incentive, it affects somebody else. And again, it goes back to the example, you could just use the same city, the north side and south. Sales tax is increasing downtown, but what's happening elsewhere right now, especially since it's flat? The data shows it's flat right now across citywide. So does an incentive hurt another city that doesn't give incentives? If you're a business, are you going to choose the one where you can minimize your risk to your investors over the city that does not offer it? Most likely you are. Again, I don't blame anybody for taking it because it's smart business.
Tony, if you had a magic wand on the city commission and these incentives went away in Fargo, and West Fargo says, baby, here's our opportunity. We're going to go. We're going to do it. Do you still think it's a good idea for Fargo to opt out, just from the standpoint of the best use of the tax dollars?
Having a low, sustainable, predictable tax rate is what brings good companies to your city. If we had the lowest tax rate up front, and some other city has a low tax rate for 5 years, and then it jacks up to double or whatever it is, they're going to come here. People come to Fargo. FedEx came to Fargo because we have 2 interstates, a great airport, a great workforce. They did not come to our city for a $620,000 exemption. All right. So I want good companies there for the long term. There are companies out there that go from city to city to city. Now, I could name names, I'm not going to. But they came to Fargo, they asked for incentive, we said no, they went down to the next city. So that was the one time where we said no, and people still use it as an example of why we should use incentives. Since that happened, that same business has moved 2 more times because their time ran out on their incentive.
Dale, I keep wanting to say listener, apologize, that's what I do for a living. Another listener. I guess you are listening, but you're not listening on the radio, you're here in person. Another one of our texters here says, stop subsidizing bars, beer sells itself.
Well,
you got nothing on that?
I'll take that one for just a moment.
I mean, if you look at the Renaissance Zone, or the TIF, or any of these other programs, and you think they go to just bars and restaurants, that's just, I don't even know what to say about that. I think
guess what
maybe
they're saying
2
is,
have taken it out of 119?
In Fargo, similarly, we have a great entertainment district, and I can think of a couple of the places that have actually used the Renaissance Zone to really redevelop their property. One in particular is just a small business. It's just a little local bar, but he took advantage of the opportunity to reinvest in his building, and he recreated the second story into living space that is rentable. It's one of the smallest of the Renaissance Zone projects in our downtown, because we aren't talking about just big projects. There are so many really great examples in our downtown of projects that were just the mom and pop shop type things, and it made all the difference for them to be able to recreate their space and breathe new life into their businesses.
Somebody
the
asked.
Scenario that you had
Go ahead,
said
Dale.
earlier. The scenario you had said about one city being accelerated, another one trying to play catch up. The Renaissance program was the one we keep talking about because that's the one under scrutiny, and TIF is another one. But the legislature is the one that is controlling the Renaissance Zone. If you get rid of the program, we need to do it statewide so we don't have those unfair advantages. When I talk to our mayor and our city commissioners, and I asked them to please, encourage the Renaissance Zone to go on, it wasn't because I think that we need more incentives downtown. It's because I don't want my city to be at a disadvantage to their city. I want to be on the same level playing field. If we have a level playing field amongst all of our communities, I got money on Bismarck. I really do. Sorry, everybody from Fargo and Grand Forks. I'm gonna invest where I live, and that's just it. The Renaissance Zone, the TIF district, I can't tell you how much angst this gives us people in the downtown, because it is an easy target, because people don't understand it, and they are so upset because it thinks it costs them taxpayer money. So they attack the businesses. I've been boycotted 3 times in the last 2 years because they think I'm for these programs and I've taken these money. I have not. And I lived through these boycotts, and my neighbors lived through these boycotts. But why do we make it so much harder on each other when we're all supposed to be Greater North Dakota Chamber, right? We're all in the same boat. So why aren't we acting as that? Why are we attacking a community within a community? It shouldn't be that way. So I believe you guys should probably sunset this, because I'm tired of dealing with it.
Dale was our
Those boycotts aren't going to last too long, though. The stakes are too good. Sorry, Kate, what do you want to say?
Dale was our board vice president for 4 years. One of my ulcers, I think, is named after Dale, but he definitely, he hasn't taken it, but Dale he knows every crouton. He's sold every day, every lemon
where my
wedge.
lemon slices go.
What it cost him, and when Dale first came onto our board, I would say that maybe he didn't understand how these things worked, and he has taken that new information in, and it's changed his viewpoint to some extent. I think that's what people really need to do. The numbers and the research are here that some of these are really good, and you can't really, you don't have the luxury as a public servant or as a city official to just kind of, go on your own dogma and not take in these new facts and really change your opinion. And so,
Holy buckets, dogma made it here.
My dogma.
That's usually a,
I went to
kind
UND,
of some
we're
caller that
throwing
wants me to
words
fall
out
off the
like
place of the
crazy,
earth. That gives
so-
me that
What's
one.
your sociopath?
Communication.
Nolan, a question about what incentives were used in the 5 South project?
Well, it's essentially a new TIF district is what's created, and basically they are going to pay taxes. There's a lot of misconception that people inside of a TIF do not pay taxes. They're paying taxes, however those taxes are used for downtown improvements, essentially. Okay, and the new TIF district of Bismarck is basically going to pay for things where every other citizen is specialed on. Okay, so again, what would happen if everything was just done? What would happen to our downtown? I think it would still thrive. I think we're at a point right now where we're still going to thrive as a community. You're seeing it elsewhere in Bismarck where we're thriving, we're booming. So again, when is enough enough? This is the original TIF is older than I am. Has it completed its purpose? I believe so. It's time to sunset them and move on.
I'm curious what percentage each of you think of the projects that are incentivized would not happen but for this. Just rough guess. In other words, this was the reason they're there. Just give me a percentage. Do you understand the question? What percentage of the projects that have been incentivized would not happen but for this incentive?
I think it's
What do
unfair.
you think, Dave? I'm going to go right down the line this way.
Oh, wow. Over the course of the years I was downtown looking at those projects, it made the difference between making the payments or not. So 80% of them wouldn't have happened.
Okay. Tony?
Early on, I bet it was a lot. I bet it was good, but over time, now 5 years after it started, you saw leveling out of the valuations. So I would say today, 10% of them need it, 10% of them. And do we want that? Is that worth it to make other people pay more? There are county commissioners and city commissioners in this audience right now from all over the state. I want you to go and ask them what the impact is to every taxpayer in their city. They won't know. No one does. So is it worth the impact is the biggest question for me.
Kate, what do you think?
I think the city of Bismarck has actually asked that question and got the response. I can't tell you what the percentage is, and I don't want to venture a guess. I would say probably the majority would maybe not be there without it. Partly is because we hold those developers to a higher standard. We are increasing the cost for them to develop something that we know will last longer. And so I think that's part of the reason that it's definitely needed to offset the higher cost.
Nolan?
I don't think there's I don't think anybody would know that answer.
Just
Who would
asking
be
for your
here.
best gut,
But,
you know.
but it goes back to there is no checks and balances when we give incentives. The bigger picture, there's no checks and balances. If you need an incentive, as you're saying, to start a business, there's nothing in place that says if you exceed your profits by $1 million or $2 million, you have to pay back those incentives that you got. There's nothing in place right there. So again, there's no data that would say how many businesses would or would not be here without it. All you could do is drive around, whether you're in Dickinson or Williston or Bismarck or Fargo, and look at businesses that have and haven't used any type of incentives. Growth is happening all across our state.
What do you think, Dale?
I don't know. I mean, the Burleigh County Commission, was notoriously voted 5-0 against the Renaissance Zone, which affected the downtown, which is in the county, yes. But on the same hand, for years and years and years, they gave tax exemption for 2 years to new houses. And then they expected all of us to build the roads to get there and incentivize the people to move outside of city limits where taxes are half the price. Is that an incentive? Probably for that builder that builds those houses, yeah. Is that a disincentive, picking losers? Yeah, because Mrs. Jones has a house from 1950 and she's trying to sell it, and she can't because it's cheaper for her to buy outside of city limits, taxes are half, and I get a 2-year property tax exemption. So Burleigh County, I don't know what you guys are thinking there, but you pick and choose losers as well. So let's not pretend that the county doesn't.
All right, you have a who's who of North Dakota right here, hearing this argument. We're going to wrap this up with each of you in your best 30 seconds on your position on this. David?
We have a lot left to do. I think the Renaissance Zone, again, I said it earlier, is the biggest hammer in the toolbox. It has worked beautifully. It continues to work very well. We have so much additional potential to continue to grow and develop our downtown and to take advantage of the infrastructure that is in place and to continue to provide a great neighborhood, a great venue, a great place. And Renaissance Zone by itself, I think, is a wonderful tool. And it has made the difference for small shops. It's made the difference for large projects. And I'd like to see it continue.
35 seconds, so now you have 25, Tony. But yeah, go ahead, Tony. Your best 30 seconds.
Incentives they may sometimes be used for a limited time and scope. When it's indefinite, when it grows and grows over time, which it always does with any government program, by the way, you see the side effects, and the side effects are other people get charged more. You see the side effects of all the things we've talked about today. So I want all of you, seriously, to call your city commissioner, send them an email, ask them what the impact is, and see if they know. See if they even know what that is.
Kate?
I agree with Tony. I think there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on what the impact is, but I think you're going to find that the impact with incentives used in urban mixed-use areas are going to give you a return, and ones that use kind of in greenfields, maybe not. But they also could provide a service or are providing housing. I'm not saying don't build single-family housing. I think if it's a question of fairness and leveling the playing field, that's kind of pie in the sky, because every neighborhood in a community has its own needs. Industrial areas need big, heavy roads. The beer that Dale sells, the sales tax helps offset that road. So we can't pit areas of the community against each other. They all have different needs. A lot of it is subsidized. A lot of it, comes from, your taxes. It just depends on what you want. But, to say other parts of town aren't subsidized is not correct. And I'm happy that our Bismarck City Commissioners are looking at, cold hard spreadsheets and aren't getting emotional about the decision.
We heard a lot about a tool being in the toolbox. And just because that tool's in the toolbox doesn't necessarily mean we need to use it. Look at a police officer, many tools on their belt. They have to use the appropriate tool, or they'll most likely be sued and fired, and things won't go right. So Dale's a prime example. He has not used these incentives. He's thriving downtown. He's doing fine. So this discussion needs to continue. It can't just be today, but we need to look at this not just as a certain city in Bismarck, but as a state and as policymakers. Are these necessary? I truly believe we need to start sunsetting these.
And final word, Dale?
I agree with a lot of what's been said, and it's very hard for a businessman who looks at the past of what was vacant and now is prospering and say we need these programs. But again, it's hard to defend a multi-billion-dollar corporation like FedEx in Fargo. I mean, it's indefensible. I can't defend it. I'm sorry, I can't. And I'm pretty sure the guy that said that from FedEx, I'm sure he's probably on the unemployment line. I don't know. But I'm telling you, it is hard as a local businessman to look at these business incentives and like Kate said, you know, put everybody in the same pot, because these multi-billion-dollar companies that get these incentives to come here, it is hard to defend. But when I look around my community and 119 Renaissance Zone projects in my little downtown area, and I see all these mom and pops that have taken that incentive and how they wouldn't be there, because that is where entrepreneurs really start, is in a downtown, and it's always been that way, because your cost of getting into business is the lowest, because dollar per square foot is the lowest. Your startup money is the lowest. And sometimes these incentives are the difference between making and breaking. So when I look at the community that I live in, I love to see all these individualities of all these businesses of the 119 that have taken the incentives versus corporate chains coming in. My generation is probably one of the worst, because for 20 years we were preaching, someday I hope we get an Olive Garden. You know, we'll hit the big time as soon as we get that.
Oh, God, yeah.
Really? That's the big time? Come on.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank our panelists, would you? And we'll see you at lunch.
All right, another thanks to the panel. And panelists, if you would step off to the right side. Panelists, panelists, if you would step off to this side of the stage, the other left, that way. Andy has a little subsidy for you, he wanted me to tell you. That was a lot of work for one little joke.
This was an incentive.
This is an incentive, that's right. Okay, lunchtime, food time, and so out those doors, there are two lines, one on the west, one on the east, and you can utilize both sides. So you can get 4 lanes going. I'm told the food is better on this west lane, so you're going to want to be over here. We're going to have lunch in the courtyard. There's also a room directly behind you that's open for overflow seating. And at 12:25, there will be a presentation in this room from the Lignite Energy Council. And again, you can pick up those tickets to the packed dinner right out front. The minimum suggested donation is $50, and we'll be back here in about an hour.